Pixar is one of those studios that can shape a lot of people's perceptions in many positive and lasting ways. After watching Soul, I thought to myself, I really want to revisit some of these films. So I rewatched all 23 Pixar movies to see if they hold up and give my overall thoughts on each of them. And just to make sure with you guys, this is my personal opinion. So if you guys like Cars 2, good for you guys. It's not like it's gonna change my mind or anything unless you erase it.
How about that pistachio ice cream?
We serve food here, sir.
Cars 2. Okay, what movie did you expect me to start off with this list? Of course it's Cars 2. This was the first official dud that Pixar put out, and yeah, what everyone says about this movie is right. This film is pain.
That's it.
I guess if I need to be a little positive, I'll say that there is a slightly funny scene with Mater and the Japanese toilet. But aside from that, this movie does everything in its power to not be like the first one. I mean, come on, we can all agree that the first Cars wasn't exactly high Pixar art or anything, but at the very least, the movie had a consistent enough narrative and a pretty good heart within it. This movie starts off with a boat.
Alright, buddy, we're here. Right where you paid me to bring you.
Excuse me, am I already lost? Every frame of this movie feels like it wants to throw a new toy at you. Like, remember that London bus that you saw a few seconds ago? Of course you don't, but that doesn't matter because toys are what's most important for this franchise. And it's fine to have toys and merchandise in your movies, but what's not fine is making the first frame of this film a cheap ad for Battleship. Would it really surprise you at this point? I think it's safe to say that every decision this film makes sucks and sucks hard. Like making Larry the Cable Guy the main character as opposed to the comic relief is honestly just as bad as it sounds.
Like a good neighbor, Mater is there.
My god, are you trying to piss us off? How did this woodchuck of a car get his own solo feature? Did John Lasseter go to the writers and say, hey, let's make a spy car movie with Lawrence the Cable Guy as our main character? I love it. I mean, the audience just demands a movie about the tow truck, am I right? And on top of that, this world makes no sense. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a London bus that shows up for a few seconds, and that got me thinking. How do the cars get inside the bus? How does the bus breathe? How is it a living thing? Is it a living thing? Does it have organs? How does it eat? What does it eat? Do they eat? Do they procreate in a factory or do they mate or... And before people start tapping on their keyboards, none of them were answered throughout these films. The best compliment I can give this movie honestly is, I'll say this, it's a bunch of pretty visuals to keep your toddler quiet, and that's not what you should think of when you think Pixar. But if I were you, I would drive away from this movie as fast as possible.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way. I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
The Good Dinosaur is one of those movies that I can definitely say is bad, but there aren't many bad things in it. This film tries so hard to make you feel something, and though that doesn't often work, there are a few scenes where I felt like there was a vision coming out, it just wasn't fully realized. The best scene in the movie is when Arlo shows Spot his family with the sticks, and that's a really touching moment. It has little to no dialogue, a lot of great atmosphere, and the visual storytelling that Pixar does very well. But that leads me to the main problem with the film, and that's its inconsistency. Particularly the animation. Now don't get me wrong, the backgrounds in this movie are just unbelievable. Mainly because it's the first movie to incorporate photorealistic backgrounds in an animated film. But the issue with that is the foregrounds. they are not very convincing. Let me give you an example. Take Land Before Time. The characters in that movie blend well with the environments because they were animated in a way that feels real. Like, look at these dinosaurs, they don't belong in this world. And that's not all. The tone of this film moves as if it's a damaged shopping cart. Like it doesn't even know when to just stop and calm down. Like some scenes can be really odd and downright a mistake. Some scenes can be unpleasantly dark, and some try to recreate that scene of Dumbo getting drunk. Can you guess what tone that is? It's insanity! It's friggin' insanity! But is it awful? No, it does have enough elements to be better than that. But if I were you, I would watch Land Before Time instead.
Come on, dig!
So a while ago I made a video on the top 10 movies I hate but everybody else seems to love, and one of the films that was on the list was Monsters University, and I'm happy to announce that my opinion hasn't changed all that much. Though I will say that there are a few times where there is legit creativity with the designs of the monsters, or some of the scare games, or the fact that I actually got a laugh once in a while. Sometimes it can just sum up my opinion about this film in a nutshell. I also found out that Aubrey Plaza was in this movie, so that's a win. And like I said before, the last 15 minutes of this film is actually really solid.
How come you never told me that before?
Because we weren't friends before.
But with that said, it is amazing the lack of creativity this film can get to. Even though I don't think this film should have existed, having an idea of monsters going to college could be a really funny idea. Just look at the Pixar short they made called Party Central. That short was way better because it took advantage of the environment they were in and made it pretty enjoyable. But then again, the short's like 6 minutes long and this film is like an hour and a freaking half. There's literally no contest. This film rarely takes advantage of this concept and gives us the lamest stereotypes you can find. You name it, the bully jock, the stuck-up dean, the quirky dorks, which leads this film into being a dull, drawn out, and overall tedious borefest. You know something else that pisses me off? At the beginning of Monsters Inc. when Sully and Mike are going to work, you hear this line.
You've been jealous of my good looks since the 4th grade, pal.
Now that seems like nothing, right? It's just said as a throwaway joke. But what pisses me off is the fact that this movie does a clear point that they meet each other in college, where they specifically said that they met each other in elementary. This movie could have been called Monsters Elementary, for crying out loud. Nobody would have cared. It still would have sucked. But if you like it, more power to you. It's not like it's offensive or god-awful or anything like that. But for me, this is a definite film that will scare me away.
Walt Disney Pictures presents a Pixar Animation Studios film.
Brother Bear.
Brave is a movie. To be completely honest with you guys, when I first watched this film, I really hated it. I was like, really, Pixar? You had to copy Brother Bear of all places. That wasn't even a hit to begin with. But after watching it again, it's actually a bit better than I remember. I guess why I hated this film so much was because my expectations were so high after seeing the teaser. I mean, look at it. How is this not just a fascinating concept? So I guess I got so let down by the film. I had the lowest expectations for this viewing, but truth be told, it's actually not half bad. I think the strongest points of this film is actually the mother and daughter relationship, which funny enough you don't even see in a lot of films. It's usually father-son, father-daughter, brother-brother, brother-sister, sister-sister. Bottom line, the mother's usually dead. And surprisingly enough, the dynamic between them is addressed pretty well. The main issue I honestly have with this movie is that I feel like this film just needed just one clear idea. Like, remember that scene where Merida shoots the bow and arrow? When you watch that scene by itself, it really is iconic. But when you see what led to that scene, it's just ridiculous. And speaking of Merida, let's talk about her for a bit.
I'll be your mommy.
Now I know a ton of people that give her so much flack, hell even Disney hates her.
Lang me your lumry, give me a moose nail, Lee, you're gurning away a teardrop in his eye. Hey, she back, wee lassie?
Wait a minute. Who are you?
But I think the main reason for that is when you see the posters, she really looks like an awesome warrior type princess that you don't really see from Pixar. But despite that scene in the beginning and maybe a few times in the third act, she doesn't do anything especially heroic in this film. I mean, personally, I don't hate her. I think the design of her is really cool and her delivery can get a laugh once in a while. But honestly, she's just like every other Disney princess. Another thing I can say is that the last third of this movie is actually alright. It ain't the violence that saves the day. It actually shows that the action-prone princess uses peace and logic to calm things down, and the mother that's the complete opposite has to use violence so she can survive. But sadly, the first 2/3 of this film is kind of eh. It's not that it's awful, it just continuously rubs everything in your face and feels very rushed and cluttered and kind of clumsy. Anyway, Brave just exists. It's not as bad as I remember, but it's definitely not worthy of winning an Oscar because the Academy Awards are a joke.
And the Oscar goes to Brave.
Ugh, but it's not bad. Moving on.
Tastes like chicken.
A Bug's Life frustrates me in a way because I feel like there's a funny script trying to come out from all the rushed mediocrity. The highlights of this film are two elements that make this movie. First of all, the circus bugs. They are hilarious. Every line they have is comedic gold.
Finally, I'm a beautiful butterfly. My wings. Oh, they're beautiful.
The second thing is the villain. He's nothing fantastic or anything, but he's probably more intimidating than most Pixar villains. And he honestly deserves to get the best line in the entire movie.
I hate it when someone gives away the ending.
And his death though, holy wowza. But the thing that bothers me is honestly everything else. I'm of course talking about the main characters. And the thing is, they're not awful, they're just not very interesting. The main character is just kind of there, I guess. He's kind of awkward and a screw up, but has a good heart. And that's fine if there's anything new or distinct about him, but there really isn't. Though I will say that once in a while, he might have a great line.
You know what this is? This, my friends, is false advertising.
The Ant Clan is just kind of a boring Ant Clan. The love interest is kind of a boring love interest. And of course we have the liar reveal trope, which I don't hate like most people do, but this is the highlight of that tiredness. It's not funny, it's not intense, it's not even that emotional because you can't relate to any of these characters, and on top of that you already got the bird. At this point it doesn't matter what type of bugs they are. What did you want, just that one scene? Look guys, I know you have Pixar on your title, but when you forego logic and common sense just to have that fight, it makes the experience all the more forced. But honestly, that's A Bug's Life in a nutshell for you. Is it terrible? No, I can't even argue and say it's a bad movie. But Ants is still the better Pixar movie, TBH, don't at me.
Oh! Somebody! Oh! He needs some milk!
Oh, Cars 3. You poor unfortunate soul that is Cars 3. Why did you have to have this fantastic, excellent, brilliant short before this film that is Lou? I'm serious, by the way. I'm one of the few people that watched this film in theaters, and the short really is fantastic. It's funny, it's sweet, and a part of me would have really liked it if it played before Coco instead of Olaf's Godforsaken Adventure. Anyway, Cars 3 is pretty okay. What I admire most about this film is that honestly, Lightning McQueen is at his most likable. I've never really liked his character and I still don't, but at least in this movie, I feel like he's an actual character and not, you know, ka-chow! Also, somebody do a wow count on this movie. I think it broke the record even for Owen Wilson. But don't do a drinking game, you might die.
Wow. 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 Pretty fast. Wow.
But anyway, I do like the fact that this movie tries to take a more adult approach and a bit of a character study with the story. But again, that kind of comes to a fault because the first 30 minutes really feel like an apology for Cars 2, right down to Mater being ridiculously sidelined, but don't worry, he's in a few scenes because, you know, he's got fans. But just when the demolition derby comes in, things really start to pick up. I'm not even joking, that is the best scene in the movie, and it's probably the only time where I was legitimately enjoying myself. And that's another fault with this film, it's just not funny. As much as I loathe Cars 2, you can tell that it was trying to make some jokes, even though they were just horrendous.
This cannot be him.
Is she American?
Is he okay?
He might be dehydrated. I know just the trick.
Extremely.
Then it's him.
But this film wasn't even trying, and if they were, they just weren't landing.
The beach ate me.
Is that a joke? There was also a subplot about Lightning McQueen becoming a product. And as soon as Lightning refuses and says that he doesn't think of himself as a brand or something like that, I'm like, boy, the entire existence of this franchise is specifically made just for this brand. If they wanted to make an actual Pixar movie, they would have answered every question people were asking about with these cars ages ago. That's why the teaser hooked people up for a while, because it actually looked like it was going to answer these questions. And I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have come up with this idea if the last words of this teaser did not say, "From this moment, everything will change," which also had me thinking, is McQueen gonna need life insurance or car insurance? Because like Mater said in the masterpiece called Cars 2,
Like a good neighbor, Mater is there.
Okay, here we go. Focus. Speed. I am speed.
out of all the Pixar movies that are on this list, I still can't wrap my head around Cars.
Race cars don't need headlights because the track is always lit.
If you guys didn't know, I was born in 2006 and this film came right after I was born. And if I recall correctly, my folks told me that the first movie I've ever watched ever was actually Cars. And yeah, this movie's technically not good. In fact, Cars 3 is objectively the best one in the series.
I have to use the bathroom.
But for me, I simply favor towards this film because it does have that sense of nostalgia that I really like. For a guy that both lives in California and has gone on so many friggin' road trips that are too hard to even count, there is this setup to this film that feels very breezy and laid back, which I tend to really enjoy. The story of this movie is actually surprisingly quite brilliantly not very special. It's a hotshot race car that gets changed by the end and learns to enjoy the simple life. And personally, that's what this movie is to me. Simple. And to its credit, the ending of this movie is unironically legit great. It's slow, moving, takes its time, and it builds up a momentum that this film originally had. But like everybody has said before, there are a lot of problems with this movie. First of all, this movie doesn't have many laughs. I mean, there would occasionally be a funny little visual gag or a great line here or there.
It looks awful. Well, it matches the rest of the town.
Damn! But the humor never tickled me as it should have. And like I said before, this entire world of Cars makes literally no sense. I would have honestly really liked it if they were race car drivers, or if you want to go fully out there, you could have done something like a dystopian society, or maybe something like they did with Toy Story. Like, those could have been ideas. But I can't help it, I still have a bit of a soft spot for this film. Sure, it doesn't look anything special, nor the characters, or the story for that matter, but it's still a fun road trip that I really wouldn't mind visiting sometime.
Trash?
No. Toys. They're all toys.
Trash.
From all the sequels that Pixar's been throwing up in the last decade, Toy Story 4 feels like the most unnecessary. Sure, Cars being a franchise is like a joke by itself, but that was targeted to like the 5-year-old crowd. This is Toy Story, but this movie is good, and I will give credit that it does two things that are better than the other 3 films. The first one is that there's actual evolution for Woody in this movie. As great as the other 3 are, Woody is still that loyal toy he always was since the first film. But now, Woody is actually okay being lost with Bo Peep, which is really interesting and done very well. The other thing is Bo Peep herself. This is easily the best she's ever been. What did she even do in the first 2? She was mainly just supportive to Woody and having this weird flirtatious relationship that went pretty much nowhere. But here they actually have chemistry. The best scene in the movie is actually the beginning where Woody is saying goodbye to Bo. And it's actually such an anxiety-provoking moment, and that was probably the main reason why I just fell in love with this movie in the first viewing. But here's where my problems come in. Everybody else is insultingly sidelined. Like, Buzz gets a fair share of screen time, but it's usually that stupid joke about his inner voice that was never funny in the slightest.
Woody and Forky were last seen on the highway. But where's the highway? You stupid!
Everyone else just seems like they were shoved in at the last minute with nothing to really do. And all the new characters are fun and have some great laughs, but they're just not like the old ones. Even the antique store, which is a really funny idea, and they do things with it like Gabby Gabby, and the dummies who are legit hilarious. But that's pretty much the only things they do. I mean, you see a cat named Dragon, which is a promising idea, but it's just a regular, really well animated photorealistic cat, which granted, is kind of unbelievable when you compare the animation from the dog in the first film. I also really don't like the fact about Bonnie not giving an iota about Woody. She picked Jessie over Woody in this film. That shows a lot about her. Sure, it's essential for his character arc, but when you see Andy being tormented about giving Woody away in the third film, it really just tears you up. And she had only one job, and that really makes her an unlikable character. Anyway, the way people defend this movie is that the third one was where Andy's story is complete but not Woody's. And I totally understand that side, but why wasn't this movie just called Woody the Cowboy? If they're making a Buzz Lightyear movie, why wouldn't you make a Woody movie too? If they changed the name, ditch the Buzz subplot, tweak the story with better comedy, this would have been a very welcomed addition to the series. But this is still a very well made movie, even though I think it's very unnecessary.
Wait, who are you?
We're the Avengers, man.
Onward gets so much flack in my opinion. The general reputation this movie gets is that it's good, but it's not as good as some of the other Pixar films. And where I totally agree that it's not Pixar's best, I don't get why this movie gets ranked with The Good Dinosaur, because that's kind of harsh if you ask me.
How'd you get your scar?
You wanna know how I got these scars?
You wanna know what happened? Yes, already!
I will admit that the first 10 minutes of this film really made me worried. I wasn't into the world building at all, and Chris Pratt's character really started to annoy me. But as soon as Ian opens the recording tape of his father, things really start to pick up. One of the best aspects of this film is the story, and it's rare that I say this, but the story to this film is one of the best Pixar's ever encountered. The other strength of this film is the brother bonding aspect, which is nothing new, but they do it very well. Both Barley and Ian are incredibly likable. Tom Holland brings this sort of shy but charismatic type of character which works perfectly.
I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir. Please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
And it took me a while to get into Chris Pratt's character, but as soon as the quest came in, I started to really dig him. And I am legally obligated to say that Chris Pratt was in the Lego Movie, which is the best animated movie ever made. Go see the Lego Movie. But what the movie does best is that it builds up to the ending, which is hands down one of the best Pixar endings forever. And the best part is they don't retcon anything. Ian doesn't get to see his father. And that's actually kind of brilliant. But there are two elements that bring this movie down to being a really great movie. The first one is that the world building in this film is just so stale. I mean, it's basically just the human world with fantasy creatures. The movie should have made a world like Zootopia where the layouts look so gorgeous and creative while still showing some clever analogies. The other thing is that it could have been funnier. A good example is at the beginning where the police officer comes in. And you know he's a centaur by the first minute he shows up. The entire theater was like, he's a centaur, come on, he's a centaur, we get it, we get the joke, he's a centaur.
Barley, barley, barley. Every time the city tries to tear down an old piece of rubble, I gotta drag my rear end out here and deal with you.
And if the movie took more advantage of the ideas this film brought to the table, it really would have been like my top 10 easily. But it's still a really good movie that'll make you cry, make you laugh, and make you feel enchanted. So Monsters, Inc. is a good movie, despite all the memes and the merch want you to believe. It never quite grabbed me as much as the other Pixar films because I actually thought there was going to be more of an oomph to it. Like, what I mean is that I thought it was good, but not 96% good. I mean, there's some good stuff. The setup to this film is legit creative, even though I can't say it's the most original thing on the planet. Like, come on, you've seen this before in Beetlejuice and Saturday morning cartoons, but nevertheless, this does create a fun world with creative looking monsters. The score is also really good too. It's got that memorable melody that people still use to prank classes.
What is that? What are you doing to me? Stop!
I also really love the climax. If the film was re-released in theaters, I would definitely go see it because even though you can watch it on the small screen, it's still really suspenseful and you feel the moment. Mr. Waternoose is honestly really intimidating right down to the way he runs, which, good God, that really got me nightmares. But what I love most about this film is the relationship between Sully and Boo. And honestly, this is something that people are kind of mixed on because Boo is kind of pandering to the children, but it's the relationship that I love. Like when you see them starting to bond and Sully wanting to play with Boo and him learning not to fear her is actually kind of profound on so many levels. And come on, how could you not cry when you see Sully's happiness in the end? And speaking of that, why didn't this movie get a sequel? Wouldn't this have been so great if we knew what happened after that? Maybe Boo grows up and Sully's still watching her, which is really creepy, but you know, it's Pixar. Maybe Boo could communicate with monsters or didn't even believe in monsters, which could show the loss of childhood. God, this could have raised so many questions and it could have been great. But it's not a perfect world because when you type Monsters Inc. 2, you get this, which is really disappointing, but hey, at least we're getting a Disney Plus series. Yay! But obviously, this ain't a perfect movie due to some of the problems really dragging it down. Okay, look, I know this is gonna sound crazy, but where I think John Goodman is great as the role, I surprisingly never get into Billy Crystal. I mean, sometimes it works, like when he was confronting Randall.
Where is it, you little one-eyed cretin? Okay, first of all, it's creepy. If you're gonna threaten me, do it properly.
But other times really fall flat.
Well, then why don't you find some place for you to sleep?
While I think of a plan!
I could see someone like Ken Jeong or Jack Black or even Patton Oswalt, just somebody with a deadpan, cynical tone. And I know I'm being too hard on Crystal because he's legit a great actor, but if he's a big part of the movie and does a lot of the comedy, it kind of ruins the experience and the comedy. But I'm not gonna lie, it would have been amazing if this was a Scream. Or this. Look, you can still cast Jablinski Games, guys. He says yes to everything. I also think Randall is a bit of a weak villain. I mean, the design is cool and Buscemi is the perfect choice for the role, but He's written in a way that's so weak, especially compared to Water News. But still, Monsters Inc. is a pretty good movie. Sure, I would have really liked a continuation of this story, but hey, at least we're getting a Disney Plus series. So much better.
They're robots, and they don't have to talk to each other. They just communicate in beeps and boops, and little sparks come from their hands, and they fall in love, and they dance through the cosmos, and it's beautiful. Robots in love!
Wall-E is wonderful. There is no doubt that this film is a game changer in visual storytelling. The first half of this movie is fantastic, with having little to no dialogue, a ton of great atmosphere to let you feel the reality that these machines are living in, and also focusing on the way these robots are interacting off each other. And I'm just gonna say it, Wall-E is one of my favorite Pixar characters. With having barely any dialogue except Wall-E, you immediately know his character. He's like Stanley Ipkiss, kind of a sweet, hopeless romantic that doesn't like the fact that he's lonely and wants more love in his life. Eve is also very likable, even though I never quite got why she destroys everything if something moved, because isn't the goal of the mission to find a plan and secure it? Can't what you're doing end up killing the plan? So that's a little weird. But something people always talk about that's not very good is the second half, and it's fine. Even though it's not quite as magical as the first half, it does have its great moments. The scene where Wall-E and Eve fly through space is wondrous. The scene where Eve falls in love with Wall-E is very effective. The scene where Eve tries to fix Wall-E is very affectionate. Bottom line, any scene with Wall-E and Eve is amazing. I guess the problems I have with this film do kind of revolve around the second half. First of all, we all know what lesson this is gonna be by the first minute this movie's on. It's a tale about the future and the fact that technology is eventually gonna pollute the environment, and that's a great moral, but it's spelled out in a way that doesn't feel as powerful as how the first half cleverly displayed it, because the environment was more than enough. I also think the world they create for the humans is kind of lame. From the outside, it looks really cool, but the inside just doesn't look anything different from, say, Futurama or the Jetsons. I also really don't like the inconsistency of having live action footage in some places and then computer animated ones in others. Like, it's not terrible. I mean, the whole Hello Dolly aspect is very essential to complete Wall-E's arc, but it just gets kind of distracting from the tone it's trying to go for.
I know what that is!
But I guess it's kind of like the Lilo and Stitch effect, where there's one part that's just mind-blowingly fantastic, but the other part gets kind of overshadowed. But still, Wall-E is such a solid movie. So go ahead and watch it yourself to know your fate and our future.
I suffer from short-term memory loss.
Finding Dory is a very pointless sequel, but for a movie that didn't really need to exist, it actually kind of won me over. This is a movie that does repeat elements from the first one, but it does exactly what a true sequel should do. It gives us some colorful characters, some new locations, some new ideas, and it's also much funnier than the first. The best aspect about this film is Dory herself. Ellen is this character. She's always great at bringing this likable optimism that makes you want to be this character. But for a character like Dory, it would seem very tricky to make a standalone movie about her. But here's the thing. Even though we didn't need a movie about Dory, there were still a lot of ideas they could explore with her. Like, as soon as you watch Finding Nemo again, the throwaway line she says to Marlin immediately makes you feel a lot of sympathy towards her.
I don't believe this.
No, it's true. I forget things almost instantly. It runs in my family. Well, I mean, at least I think it does. Where are they?
And this movie takes full advantage of a premise like that. The main thread of this film, as crazy as it is, seems to be anxiety. You see Dory's insecurities and the fact that it's tormenting her when she's in tough choices, and you see the world falling apart with all the weird angles and the shaky cam and even the blur. And it really makes you feel that stress and anxiety, and it's so clever and deserves a lot of credit. This movie also has a very goofy sense of humor, and the majority of them them really click for me. A good example is the climax. The climax to this movie is hysterical, where Finding Nemo was very serious. This one is just so absurd with the most bizarre song you could ever choose. You kind of put your hands up in the air and say, I don't care, because it's the right amount of crazy. If I did have any problems with this movie, I'd say that the elements they repeated from the first one is a bit too obvious, particularly the first 10 minutes of the movie, where I thought it was really not gonna work, simply because I felt like it was just gonna be another retread with nothing new to add except, you know, more moolah. But aside from that, I think Finding Dory is a pretty strong film. It's not quote-unquote fantastic, but it's a ton of fun that I'll always remember to just keep swimming towards again. Also, am I the only one that really wants a Finding Marlin?
Did you wash your hands? With soap? Did you dry them?
Shut up! Incredibles 2 was the toughest choice to rank in this video because it took me a while to decide which one was better. Either the first one or this one. It's kind of like choosing between your own children. Sure, it's super hard, but you have to come to grips with it and actually decide. And yeah, this one is a bit weaker due to an element that I'll talk about a little later, but I still really like this movie. I think the main strength of this film is actually the thing that made me reluctant in actually ranking it, and it's because I felt more of a family unity that I just didn't get from the first. For goodness sake, it's called The Incredibles. If anything, this idea should have existed decades ago. And it's not like their dilemmas are the stereotypical cliches you saw in the first one. There's actual real life dilemmas that we can all relate to. But it's not just the characters I love, some of the action scenes are just phenomenal. But I think my favorite action scene of the entire movie is Jack fighting a raccoon in the backyard. How does that not sound epic?
Hey, can you throw me another croissant?
If Infinity War didn't exist, this would have been low-key the coolest thing ever to come in 2018. It's hilarious, it's intense, it's beautifully animated with fantastic slapstick, and it works because Jack is such an amazing character. There are a lot of scenes in this movie that made me laugh and laugh hard, but I think the part that really got to me was this part.
Good evening, everyone.
Whoa! I don't know why, but I just had to think of something else to stop laughing. Oh my god, it's that funny. But what sadly makes the movie weaker than the first one is the villain. The villain of this movie is just awful. She's not intimidating, she's not that funny, her motivation makes zero sense. The fact that she's late to the conference says so much about her personality just like that. Every problem I have with this movie is mostly centered around the villain, and it's such a downgrade for what we previously had. But I still think this film is almost on par with the first one, even though it could have been way better if it was just that one element that was fixed. But anyway, the unique elements are still all the more unique. And make a third one, damn it. I'm not gonna wait for 14 more years, come on! Yeah, I really meant it when I said that both of these films are really tough to rank. The Incredibles has never been one of my favorite Pixar movies. I remember loving it as a kid, but not to an extent of calling it my favorite. And my opinion hasn't changed all that much, but this movie is great, but it's got some stuff holding it back to being one of my total faves. But first, let's talk about the stuff I do like. The best aspect of this movie is honestly the writing. The writing feels very intelligent and quick, and even some of the dialogue is not only iconic, but very clever.
I thought you'd be back by 11.
I said I'd be back later.
I assumed you'd be back later. If you came back at all, you'd be back later.
Well, I'm back, okay?
Also, with one exception, this might be the best Pixar score ever made. Like, just when you hear the beginning of this score, you immediately know what movie this is. It's The Incredibles, oh my god! I also love Edna. Every time she's on screen gives me joy to the max.
What is it? Who are you? What do you want?
My God, you've gotten fat. Come in, come.
But I think the absolute highlight of this movie is the villain. Syndrome is such a fantastic villain. Easily one of the best twist villains Disney, Pixar, whatever, ever created. He just has this great design, great voice. Like, come on, this dude was voiced by Dave. Yeah, this guy.
Hey. You don't have to raise your voice.
And on top of that, he's actually really intimidating. And the fact that they kept his fanboy enthusiasm is just, it's beyond amazing. And on top of that, his motivation and appearance seems so pathetic, but they made it into something phenomenal. No wonder he has the best and most iconic line of the entire film.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
But there's one major issue that I have with the movie that really drags it down to being one of my faves. Okay, so let me ask you a little question, if it's completely fine. Alright, what is this movie called? The Incredibles, right? Yeah, we all know that, yeah. If so, why isn't there much Incredibles in this movie?
Do you have any ideas?
This movie should have been called Mr. Incredible because he's honestly just the main focus. And even though it's a good character study, I'll be the first to admit that they focus on him a bit too much. All the family has is the dinner scene and the climax and maybe a few more scenes sprinkled throughout the first 2/3, but it's not enough to, stay true to the literal title.
Throw something!
I can't, I might hit Jack.
Throw me. Bob, throw me!
But The Incredibles is still an incredible movie and definitely super in my book. Also,
Where is my soup?
Remember me.
Coco is, in a word, gorgeous. Not only is this movie visually fantastic, not only does it have an aesthetic of Dia de los Muertos looking so beautiful and rich, but the characters are just so endearing and just so likable as well. Miguel is actually one of my favorite kid characters in film. Period.
No music.
What I love about him the most is that he's kind of polite and thoughtful and really likable. But he's also kind of rebellious. And they actually got a kid to play him, which is very refreshing. And good God, is his voice just incredible to listen to. And oh, did I mention that all the musical set pieces in this film are legit banger? Remember Me is astounding, but not for the reasons you would think. At first, when you listen to it, it sounds like a very big showstopper with all the dancing women and all the grand angles they would show. But then you see it as a soothing, thoughtful message which makes the ending all the more gut-wrenching. And also, this is one of the few Pixar films that I've seen in a while where the twist villain actually works in the context of the story. Sure, you can see Ernesto de la Cruz as the villain like a mile away, but what matters most is setting up the connection between Hector and Miguel to further the story. But if I did have any problems with the movie, I'd say that sometimes the score can be very misplaced. Like, it's upbeat in scenes that are supposed to be very intense, so there can be a lack of tension once in a while. And as much as I love the music in this film, there is a scene, however, where they go to this concert, and it could have been shrunken down just a tiny bit. It's not bad, it was just kind of pointless and didn't further anything apart from Hector and Miguel splitting apart, which could have happened at any time, honestly. But to me, those things are very nitpicky because the film is still really fantastic. From the world building to the characters to the music to the comedy to the animation, it's a movie that gives questions about life and death that will always be remembered in many years to come.
What would you want to be known for on Earth?
I like money.
So I should really stop that. So I'm not gonna talk fully in depth as I did with the other Pixar movies because there's already a video specifically for that, so feel free to check it out. But overall, Soul is the most mature Pixar film ever made. It's a movie that gets better and better the more and more I think about it. It's a film that you can get lost in, a film that feels very much like it has all the ingredients to be declared a classic Pixar movie. This movie tells us and Pixar, okay, We've been playing it a little safe for the last couple of years, but let's really push the boundaries and experiment what could be done in animation, and it really works. This is like if Pixar did The Good Place, and even though it's not as brilliant as The Good Place, and nothing will ever be as brilliant as The Good Place, but it's actually a really great combo.
This isn't the great beyond, it's the
Good Place.
That's a lie. It is a lie.
This film offers so much for the viewer to unpack and to analyze, and for a modern Pixar film to do such a thing, it's a miracle. It really is such a miracle. But the only issue I had with the film that I talked about in the video was the message can be pretty confusing, whether it was the stuff they should have added more of, and particularly the way it leads up to the ending. And whether you guys are in the camp of either Joe should have died or Joe should have stayed as a band teacher or something else, I totally get it. I actually don't mind the ending. I just feel like there was a lack of any epilogue, which I guess might be the point, because that really is life. There truly isn't just one correct answer, and there never will be. And that's why I respect this film more than I really love it, and I already love it a whole lot. Soul is a groundbreaking film from a groundbreaking director that's CEO of a groundbreaking studio. And I bet when I grow older, this film will probably be even higher on the list. Pixar, it's good to have you back, baby. Feels so great to say that again.
You got Steve in me.
The one that started it all. Toy Story is not just a great movie, it's the one that started the realm of CG animation. And it also potentially destroyed 2D animation, but let's be honest, Home on the Range was definitely by far the one that would heavily encourage that. But even to the fact that some of the animation actually holds up pretty well. And before you say you suck or I'm wrong, please note that I said some. Sure, the humans and the dog look really awkward, and I'm really expecting them to re-release it and update it sometime in the future. Like with the bajillion of announcements these guys have made, I feel like you guys can give us at least an updated version of the animation of this film. But what actually holds up surprisingly are the toys themselves. It was honestly a very smart idea to center the movie around toys, mainly due to the plastic textures that lend beautifully into CG animation. A great example is that spoon. How does that spoon feel like it's actually there to me? But it's not just the animation to give credit to. The main strength of this film is actually the writing. The dialogue of this film feels very modern, almost as if it was coming from The Simpsons. And the key thing is, nobody in this film is the real villain. Even though Woody could have been really unlikable if you saw some of the older storyboards.
Slinky! Slinky! Get up here and do your job! Are you deaf? I said take care of them!
I'm sorry, Woody, but I have to agree with them. I don't think what you did was right.
What?
But in the actual movie, it's just a form of jealousy, which makes the comedy all the more hilarious. And you can't blame Andy for all this, he's just a regular kid. Even Sid, who sounds like the villain of the movie, is just a very jerky kid that happens to be very identifiable.
So play nice.
And You've Got a Friend in Me is downright the best song Pixar's ever written. It's flawless in every way. I actually made a video about it, so feel free to check it out, but I just wanted to point that out because that song really is magic. But to be honest, all I really want to say is thank you, Toy Story, so much. Thank you for starting it all, and you will always be remembered in the film industry as the grandfather of computer animation.
Reach for the...
Toy Story 3 is one of the best conclusions to one of the greatest and most iconic franchises ever. This film does everything you'd expect a third Toy Story film would do. It makes all the characters grow naturally, it makes it more heavy-handed when it comes to the drama, it has an amazing villain, and it has great comedy to balance everything out. What's most unique about this film that wasn't explored much in the other two was the team aspect. In the first two, they were a team, but most of them didn't have much to do aside from only what appears to be fan favorites. You know, Potato Head, Slinky, Rex, and such. In this movie, everybody has something to do, especially in that prison escape scene, which was so entertaining to watch, by the way. And even for a moment, I was looking at those aliens and thinking of them as kind of useless, but then I remember that they were the ones that actually saved them from the furnace with the clown. Which shows how investing this movie really is even after multiple viewings. And speaking of the furnace scene, this is not only the best scene in the movie, but it's the best scene in the franchise as a whole. I don't know, it's really cool seeing every character looking at each other with horror, but still accepting their fate as long as they're together, and it's so wholesome. And trust me when I say that if this scene wasn't in this film, this movie would have been significantly shorter on the list. And on top of that, Lotso is a really intimidating villain. He's kind of an evolution of Stinky Pete with the motivation being kind of similar, but they tweak it just enough to still make it its own unique thing, which results into a fantastic villain. Honestly, the problems I have with this movie are pretty minor. Like, I don't like the fact that Bo took the shaft in this movie, and sure, the fourth film fixes that, but I think you know whether that film should have existed or not.
We've lost friends along the way. Bo Peep? Yeah, even Bo.
Bye-bye.
I'm also kind of mixed with the ending. When I was a kid, I cried, but only in the place where he grabs Woody. And when I look back, yeah, it's pretty heartwarming and a solid ending, but it can be a little too odd when you kind of suggest the fact that Andy actually knew that the toys were living all this time, which is really weird.
I can't believe I almost gave you guys away! We're gonna go to college, it's gonna be great! You guys are the best!
And we've been alive this whole time!
But this is still a fantastic movie that wrapped up one of the most iconic franchises in the most beautiful way possible, and I would love to revisit it again and again, more and more in the upcoming future.
I'm a piranha. There in the Amazon.
Wow, I don't remember Finding Nemo being this good. When I was a kid, I remember it being fine, but not much else, but now I see the maturity, wit, and emotional baggage this film carries, which easily makes this film one of Pixar's greats. If the first 5 minutes of this film weren't in the movie, we would have taken the fact that Marlin as a character is overacting a little too much just because movie and drama equal critical and financial success. But the movie expertly shows you why he's being so overprotective to Nemo, due to his wife and all his other children dying to this shark. And speaking of the characters, there are so many to remember in this film. Marlin is such a great protagonist that we can all sympathize with. Nemo is also very relatable and has a fair share of presence, and you really want to see him find his dad. And like I said before, Dory is one of the best supporting characters in a film ever. And I really think it comes to the writing and Ellen's very cheerful, upbeat delivery.
Bye, Elmo!
Nemo.
Nemo! Bye, Nemo!
And surprisingly enough, Finding Nemo is actually a lot more serious than most Pixar movies. Even the climax isn't very big or grand, but mostly focuses on some of the heavy moments and showing the weight of these scenes, which is very rare to see, especially in animated kids movies. But that doesn't mean that it can't be funny either, because the majority of them really hit bullseyes. Dory is constantly hilarious, Marlin's voice of reason has big laughs, the Tank Gang is really funny right down to the ending.
Now what?
Anything with Darla just haunts my dreams. And the crowning achievement of funny in this movie are those seagulls. Yeah, don't tell me that they don't get a laugh out of you, because if so, you do not like joy.
Mine.
I will say that I would have liked more of the show don't tell method in the film, because at times this movie can get a little too dialogue-y when it comes to the lesson, which can kind of drag, but it's still a great and unique lesson, and this is still a great and unique movie. Finding Nemo is a thrilling adventure that I would love visiting under the sea.
What I say is true. Anyone can cook, but only the fearless can be great.
Pure poetry.
Ratatouille is a movie that's oozing with great personality. Every moment of this film is just dripping with atmosphere. From the cold isolation of a sewer to the rich, elegant beauty of Paris, this is hands down a film that doesn't get a lot of credit in the Pixar canon, and honestly, this is one of the few movies that really deserves it. Remy represents the part of us we can all relate to. It's something that we strive to be, even though society shuts us down to becoming something more. It's a film that we can all relate to and sum up in only 3 words. Anyone can cook. Anyone can cook. This film powerfully shows the nature of criticism, the feeling of being held back because of your insecurities, the feeling of optimism that drives people to become much more. Sure, the film can have some story structure issues and the chefs could have gotten a lot more attention, but the stuff they do focus on is really well handled. As I said before, the atmosphere of this film is some of the best Pixar's ever mastered, and the characters are just as good. I'm not gonna say Linguini is the most interesting character on the planet, but he does have a side that people can sympathize with. You know, that feeling that all your life you're being held back and neglecting your talents, and in this case, it's him being a waiter. And I know that seems like a joke, but you know what? Good for him, man. Embrace what you love. And come on, that whole puppet controlling thing is literally slapstick in a nutshell. It is just excellent. The Critic has one of the best designs I've ever seen in animation, which is owed to Brad Bird's unique directorial style. But the ending of this film is beyond pitch perfect. This is not only the best Pixar ending ever made, but it's one of the best moments in cinema. The monologue the critic gives about the nature of criticism is brilliant, thought-provoking, relatable, and most importantly, true. Whenever I see the ending of this film, it really tugs at my heartstrings and gives me a new outlook on the true art form of cinema. You know, what else can I say about this movie? It does everything a phenomenal movie should do. It's clever, it's funny, it's entertaining, it's bizarre, it's profound, it's dramatic. I honestly don't think I could ever explain this film well enough in words. Ratatouille is a delicious delight of a movie that I'd love to appetize and will always be hungry for more.
Good afternoon.
Let's skip to the end.
I feel like I'll get so much shade on how great the first 10 minutes are. I mean, we can all agree that the first 10 minutes of this film is cinema in a nutshell. It's funny, it's touching, it's realistic, it's a powerful work of this visual medium we call film. But what people don't like as much is the rest of the film. And don't get me wrong, I have never encountered someone that hates the rest of this movie. They just felt that it wasn't as good because it started off so strong. And even though I kind of agree with that argument, I still feel that if the first 10 minutes of the movie was non-existent, I still would have really loved it. Now, don't get me wrong, there is no scene in this film that's near the excellence of those 10 minutes. Hell, this would have never been the top 3 if it wasn't for those 10 minutes. But everything else is just so creative and imaginative that you you can't help it but love it as a whole. If you told me that the premise of this movie was an old man, a Boy Scout, a rare bird, and a talking dog
Squirrel!
trying to go to a waterfall in South America in a floating house, not just floating as a house, no, with balloons, with a threat being another old man, with an army of other talking dogs, trying to get this rare bird, and in the climax, the same talking dogs are flying tiny little airplanes with a chew toy as their steering wheel. Sold. I love this concept. But it's not just that. The score to this film is hands down the best Pixar score ever conceived. It's absolutely lovely and gorgeous to listen to, with a soothing melody, and oftentimes feels very grand as well. The way they gave a personality to a dog with a voice box is beyond ingenious.
I can smell you. What? You can smell us? I can smell you.
Sit, boy. Hey, look, he's trained. Shake. Uh-huh. Speak.
Hi there.
Did that dog just say hi there?
Oh, yes.
The relationship between Carl and Russell is very touching and beautiful. And is it just me, but does Carl look like if Grunkle Stan was shrunken down with surprisingly more likability? But we can all agree that Stan's got the comedy down, am I right?
Movies are great. You watch the movie, you scare the girl snuggles up next to you, next thing you know you gotta raise a kid, your life falls apart. Forget that last part.
Like I said in my Gravity Falls video, this is going to be my future in a nutshell. And even though this could have been a great short on its own, it still works as a film because you immediately know what Carl and Ellie wanted in their life, and that was an adventure. But the film brilliantly shows you that they still had an adventure because they were together, and that really melts my heart in a way that only Pixar can do. And I don't know why, but every single time I watch this film, I always gasp in the climax where Carl is struggling to hold the house. And that's really rare for a film to invest me in countless viewings, by the way. You know, I can't really think of anything really wrong with the film. If I had to grasp for straws, I'd say that at times Russell can get a little annoying, but I honestly forgive it because most of the time he's really funny and charming. But if that's the only thing I have a gripe towards the film, that's saying a lot. Up is an adventure that I will never forget, with memorable characters, great comedy, great story, great drama. It's just, it's a ton of fun. And that's more than enough for me to recommend it.
I'm proud of you, cowboy.
Besides, when it all ends, I'll have old Buzz Lightyear to keep me company. For infinity and beyond.
Toy Story 2 is a movie that showed Pixar's staying power. As great as the first Toy Story was, you can argue that it doesn't mean that Pixar can still have some creative fumes. I mean, we can all agree that A Bug's Life was a pretty big dip, but this film does everything in its power to up the ante that we want out of a sequel. They up the animation, they up the comedy, they up the story, they up the drama, they up just about everything they could for a sequel. People actually argue that this is the weaker of the franchise due to it not giving an impact on the series, and even though I can definitely see that point of view, you can't argue that the impact this film gave was on Pixar themselves. As great as Toy Story 3 was, it was always destined to be fantastic.
Andy doesn't want us anymore. He was putting you in the attic!
Toy Story 2, on the other hand, had a bigger risk because it showed that Pixar had more creativity and talent that they wanted to bring on the screen. And it's not just that. Not only did they further the story, but the dilemma that Woody has to deal with, like facing the inevitable that Andy will grow up and will sooner or later forget about them, is a really good dilemma. And it's not just Woody. Jesse already faced the dilemma that Woody's going through. The highlight of the film is actually Jesse's backstory, and it's very well done, and you feel the past that she was tormented by. But it's not just the drama that's done well. Everything else feels like a step taken in the furthest way possible. They add new characters like Mrs. Potato Head, the evil Emperor Zurg, another Buzz Lightyear that does repeat an element of the first film, but the way it's written here it's hysterical.
You're breaking ranks, Ranger. Buzz Lightyear to Star Command. I've got an AWOL Space Ranger. Tell me I wasn't this deluded. No back talk. I have a laser, and I will use it. You mean the laser that's a light bulb? Has your mind been melded? You could have killed me, Space Ranger. Or should I say, traitor? I don't have time for this.
We have Jesse, Bullseye, the Prospector, who is already the first Pixar twist villain, but he's easily the best Pixar twist villain. And I miss Pixar bloopers.
Prospector, how about you?
And so you two are absolutely identical? You know, I'm sure I could get you a part in Toy Story 3. I'm sorry, are we back? Oh, all right, girls. Lovely talking with you. Yes, anytime you'd like some tips on acting, I'd be glad to chat with you. All right, off you go then.
Dude, I don't know what else to say. It's just phenomenal. This was the game changer for Pixar as an animation studio, and it showed the powerhouse that they still are. It's not only one of the best sequels ever made, but I think it's one of the best animated movies I've ever seen. For a movie that could have just been a rehash in a time where sequels were usually either not as good as the original or repeating most of the elements but just sucking hard with it, this movie showed that it can continue its roots and still make it clever, funny, emotional, dramatic, well orchestrated, well told. What else can I say? Toy Story 2 is an animated classic and deserves all the praise it gets. But there's still one more Pixar film that's simply better. Inside Out. Now you might be wondering, really? This movie? I've come all this way and your favorite movie is Inside Out? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is. When it comes to Pixar, they always try to appeal to every demographic possible, so the audience can have a wide variety they can relate to the most, like Coco is to Mexico, or how Ratatouille is to France, or how Soul is to black people, hashtag Black Lives Matter. But for me, Inside Out is the one that sucked me in the most. The story of this film is actually a coming-of-age story talking about change and adapting to new environments. And I'm at that age where I can really sympathize with every tough moment Riley's facing against. I was never necessarily moving to another state or country, but I have moved to several schools before, and I can totally identify with all the hardships and frustrations of adapting to another place and having that feeling of loss. And the film brilliantly encapsulates the importance of sadness, which is a very major problem in our everyday lives, and especially with the social media we have now, where we can simply cry at some lousy tweet. I mean, it's that serious. This movie shows you that it's okay to feel however you feel. You can feel mad, you can feel happy, you can feel sad, but you have to control them and balance them out. And that's what I think this film does best. Balance. And on top of that, this film never retcons anything. When a character dies, they die. When they make a choice, they stick with these choices because that's part of evolving, and you're just gonna have to accept some of these consequences and deal with said consequences. It shows that emotions aren't very straightforward. You think somebody's happy, they're just happy all the time? No, it's much more complex and often connected in ways that aren't always expressed in the most subtle and mature circumstances. I actually cried several times in this film, but the ones that really stuck out to me was in the beginning when Riley was born, Bing Bong losing his rocket, sadness confronting Bing Bong to make him feel better, joy breaking down but soon realizing the importance of sadness, the climax where Riley breaks down to her parents, and the one that really broke me was Bing Bong's death. And what soaked me up was when he said,
"Take her to the moon for me, okay?"
I don't know why, but that gets me every time. But with that said, this film has great comedy, beautiful animation, one of the most ingenious screenplays I have ever seen in my entire life, and such wonderful casting. I love Louis Black as anger, Mindy Kaling as disgust, Bill Hader as fear, Phyllis Smith as sadness, Richard Kind as Bing Bong, and the highlight of them all and the overall best thing in the entire movie is Amy Poehler as Joy. Joy. She is one of my favorite Pixar characters, and it's really owed to her insane enthusiasm and hilarious delivery.
And how about Minnesota? Can you tell us something about it? Well, you certainly get a lot more snow than we do.
She's hilarious.
I guess the only problem I have with the film is that it leaves me wanting more. The only thing that even resembles this film is Riley's first date, and even though that's a hysterical short, this movie not only makes me want more, but it makes me want a lot more. The same way the toys in Toy Story grow up with Andy, why don't you do the same with the emotions and Riley? If you actually watch the Blu-ray, Pete Docter was actually going to put more ideas in this movie, but couldn't due to having a limited time, but just all those ideas could have been legit their own movies. Just look at some of these lines.
Why are you crying? It's just really the opposite of what we're going for here.
Crying helps me slow down and obsess over the weight of life's problems.
Hey, guys, what's puberty?
I don't know. It's probably not important.
There's truly nothing I could say that could give this film justice. It's just magic. Pure, unfiltered, imaginative, creative magic that will always hold a special place in my heart. This is not only one of my favorite animated movies of all time, but it's one of my favorite movies, period. I laughed at the right moments, I cried at the right moments. In my opinion, it's as perfect a Pixar film can get, and it's definitely worth your time to get a little emotional about. Alrighty then, let's break down the tier list. I had no reason to say that whatsoever, but don't care, because all the movie YouTubers have tier lists, and it also sounded pretty cool. No, you're right. It didn't. You know, even after 2.5 decades, Pixar is only beginning to acknowledge the impact it's been leaving on us. Every Pixar movie, even their worst, actually has one if not a few things that still make me know that they put some effort into it. And again, please note that I said some. Okay, sure, not all these movies are masterpieces. More like a master pee-pee-poo-poo piece. Ha ha, hilarious. But even the bad ones still have some redeeming qualities that make me a little glad that I revisited them again. And that is the magic of Pixar. No matter how dull, how lazy, or how unoriginal they can get, Pixar still hasn't died in the realm of animation and will continue as the one that elevated this type of visual storytelling. Pixar, thank you for 25 wonderful years, and I hope you will continue this legacy with your future projects, and as always, to infinity and beyond.